The last bus stop sat at the end of a long, winding road, far from the glow of streetlights and the bustle of city life. It was an unremarkable location, surrounded by a patchy field overgrown with weeds and dotted with gnarled trees. The pavement beneath the bench was cracked and uneven, and the weathered sign barely clung to its post, the lettering faded and hard to read. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the shadows deepened, and a heavy silence enveloped the area. Only the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze broke the stillness. I stood at the stop, glancing at my watch, feeling a sense of anticipation mixed with unease. The bus was late, a situation that was becoming increasingly common on this route. With each passing minute, the weight of the night settled more heavily on my shoulders. I shifted my weight, casting a sidelong glance at the darkened expanse beyond the stop. A few dim lights flickered in the distance, marking the edge of town, but here it felt as if time had slowed to a standstill. The quiet was oppressive, and the absence of sound became an entity of its own. As I waited, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. I turned slowly, scanning the area, but nothing stirred in the darkness. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their twisted branches reaching out, and the empty field stretched on, merging into the night sky. My heart raced, an instinctive reaction to the eerie atmosphere that clung to the surroundings. Minutes dragged on, and the chill of the night seeped into my bones. I considered walking back toward the town, but something kept me anchored to the stop. An unspoken bond to this place, as if it held some significance that I couldn't grasp. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye at the edge of the trees. I squinted, trying to discern what it was. A figure stood just beyond the shadows, half hidden among the foliage. It was difficult to make out any details, but the outline seemed almost human. My breath quickened as I felt a pull of curiosity and dread, a desire to know more battling against the instinct to flee. I forced myself to look away, returning my gaze to the road ahead. A rush of wind blew through the stop, rustling the leaves and sending a shiver down my spine. I glanced at my watch again. Still no sign of the bus. The momentary distraction had made me lose track of time, and I couldn't help but glance back toward the figure. It was closer now, stepping into the faint light cast by the flickering street lamp. The figure appeared to be a woman, her hair long and flowing, blending with the shadows that surrounded her. She stood motionless, her head tilted slightly as if she were listening to something only she could hear. The moment felt charged, the atmosphere shifting in ways that were difficult to articulate. I stood frozen, captivated by her presence, and unnerved by the air of stillness that enveloped her. Just as I was about to call out, the bus's headlights finally appeared in the distance, illuminating the road ahead. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived as the woman abruptly turned, her figure disappearing back into the darkness before I could catch a glimpse of her face. The bus pulled up with a low rumble, the doors hissing open. I climbed aboard, stealing one last glance at the stop as I settled into my seat. The driver nodded, a silent acknowledgement of my presence, and I felt a strange urge to ask about the woman. But the words never formed on my lips. As we drove away, I turned to look out the window, the glow of the bus lights illuminating the path behind us. The trees raced by, and the shadows cast by their branches danced along the road. Yet, as we left the bus stop behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something important behind. The night deepened around us, the familiar sights of the town fading into the distance. My mind raced with questions about the woman, who she was, why she was there, and what had compelled me to remain despite the sense of unease. I felt a nagging sensation, as if she had been trying to convey a message, a connection that was lost in the silence of the night. As the bus rumbled along, I began to drift into thought, my eyes growing heavy. I fought against the urge to sleep, but fatigue weighed on me, wrapping around me like a fog. The bus continued its journey, the road stretching into an endless ribbon of darkness. With each mile we traveled, the atmosphere inside the bus shifted. The hum of the engine became a low drone, and the air grew heavier, suffused with an inexplicable energy. I glanced around at the other passengers, their faces dimly lit by the soft glow of overhead lights. Most were absorbed in their own worlds, staring blankly ahead or lost in their devices. But one passenger, seated a few rows ahead, caught my attention. He seemed out of place, his clothing old-fashioned, almost as if he had stepped out of another era. His expression was vacant, eyes fixed on the window, yet his gaze seemed distant, as if he were looking through the glass rather than at the world outside. A shiver crept up my spine as I realized he hadn't moved since we boarded. I turned back to the window, attempting to dismiss the feeling of unease rising within me. The bus rolled on, but the landscape outside began to blur, the edges of reality softening. Shapes flickered in the periphery, fleeting glimpses of shadows darting among the trees. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed through the bus, a soft whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. It drifted through the air, wrapping around me like a tendril. I leaned forward, straining to hear, but it faded just as quickly as it had come, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Panic surged through me as I looked back to the passenger, but he remained still, untouched by the atmosphere that seemed to thrum with energy. The bus rattled along, each bump in the road resonating through me, amplifying the growing sense of dread. As the lights outside dimmed further, the darkness closed in, wrapping around the bus like a cloak. The flickering lights overhead began to stutter, casting strange shadows that danced along the walls. My heart raced, and I gripped the seat, seeking comfort in its familiarity. Then, without warning, the bus came to an abrupt halt. The driver's voice broke the silence, a flat tone that echoed through the stillness. "End of the line," he said, his words hanging in the air like a warning. I glanced out the window, confusion washing over me. We were back at the last bus stop, the weathered sign illuminated by the glow of the bus lights. But this time, the landscape appeared altered, shadows creeping closer, swallowing the edges of the world. The passengers began to stir, a low murmur rising as they prepared to disembark. But something held me in place. The figure of the woman re-emerged in my mind, her silent presence haunting my thoughts. I needed to know what had happened, to understand why she had been there. As the bus doors swung open, I hesitated, my breath hitching in my throat. The moment felt surreal, as if I were standing at a crossroads between two worlds. The passengers stepped off one by one, merging into the shadows, but I remained seated, wrestling with the urge to stay or confront the unknown. Then I saw her again, standing just outside the bus, framed by the fading light. The longing in her expression drew me in, a magnetic pull that felt impossible to resist. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the growing uncertainty, and stepped off the bus. The cool night air enveloped me, and I approached her slowly. The surroundings shifted as I walked, the noise of the bus fading away, replaced by a deep silence. As I drew closer, I saw her eyes, shimmering like stars against the backdrop of night, filled with emotion that transcended words. In that moment, I understood. She wasn't merely a specter of the past. She represented the countless souls who had waited at this stop, lingering in the shadows, caught between worlds. I felt the weight of their stories pressing down, a tapestry of lives intertwined with my own, woven together through the fabric of time. I reached out, a connection sparking between us, as if bridging the gap between what was lost and what remained. The shadows danced around us, and I knew this moment would change everything. I was not just a passenger passing through. I was part of this ongoing journey, a witness to the echoes of history that resonated through the night. As the night deepened and the world faded around me, I stood beside her, no longer an observer, but an integral part of the story unfolding at the last bus stop. The whispers returned, wrapping around us like a warm embrace, and in that moment, I finally understood the significance of this place, a threshold between life and the memories that lingered in the darkness, waiting for someone to remember. The dimly lit warehouse stretched endlessly, an expansive labyrinth of metal shelves and forgotten crates. As the night shift supervisor, I was accustomed to the silence that enveloped the space after hours. The soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead buzzed intermittently, creating an unsettling backdrop to the solitude of my job. My routine was straightforward: check inventory, make notes on my clipboard, and keep an eye on the cameras monitoring the perimeter. As I settled into my task, the stillness was only occasionally disrupted by the echo of my footsteps on the concrete floor. But on this particular night, a sense of unease crept in, growing steadily as the minutes passed. I glanced around the vast expanse, its shadows stretching and shifting with each flicker of light. I tried to focus on my work, but my eyes kept drifting toward the entrance. A gust of wind rattled the metal doors at the far end of the warehouse, and I felt a shiver trace down my spine. I dismissed it as a draft, but something about the movement drew my attention. For a moment, I considered checking the cameras to see if anyone was loitering outside. As I turned to grab my tablet, a noise broke the silence. A soft shuffle coming from the back of the warehouse. Instinctively, I froze, listening intently. The sound was faint but distinct, like footsteps padding across the floor, and it sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through me. I strained to hear more, but the noise had stopped, replaced by the oppressive stillness of the night. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the settling of the building or my overactive imagination. Continuing my rounds, I moved toward the back, where the shadows were thickest. The dim light struggled to penetrate the corners, and the crates loomed like sentinels, casting strange shapes that seemed to dance in the light. As I walked, I noticed something on the floor, a small, unmarked box. It had not been there during my last inspection, and its sudden appearance felt unsettling. I bent down to examine it, noting its dusty surface and the faint outlines of what seemed to be scuff marks around it. The box was small, about the size of a shoebox, and it sat innocuously amid the clutter. Curiosity overcame caution, and I lifted it, feeling the weight of it in my hands. Something inside rattled softly, like the sound of loose change. My heart raced as I considered opening it, but an instinct warned me against it. As I stood there, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned sharply, but nothing was there. The air felt charged, crackling with an energy that seemed to thrum beneath my skin. I shook my head, trying to dispel the rising tide of anxiety. Perhaps it was just the long hours getting to me, but deep down, I knew something was different about this night. I decided to return to the office, intending to report the box to management in the morning. But as I made my way back, a soft thud echoed from behind me. It was closer now, the sound unmistakable. I stopped, my pulse quickening. I glanced over my shoulder, but the warehouse remained eerily quiet, the shadows swallowing any hint of movement. I picked up my pace, the weight of the box still heavy in my hands. Just as I reached the office door, I heard a soft whisper, faint and fleeting, like a breeze brushing against my ear. It felt as though someone was standing just out of sight, watching me. The sensation was chilling, as if I were no longer alone. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside and set the box on my desk. I turned to close the door, but it swung back slightly, as though someone had pressed against it from the other side. A chill washed over me, and I slammed it shut, locking it tight. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in my mind. I focused on the box again, its presence now more unsettling than before. What was inside? Why had it been left here? I considered calling security, but the urge to know what lay within became too strong. With trembling hands, I unlatched the box and opened it. Inside, I found a collection of old photographs, yellowed and frayed at the edges. I reached in, pulling one out. The image was faded, capturing a group of people standing in front of the warehouse, smiling and unaware of the passage of time. They were dressed in clothing from decades past, and among them, I recognized a face. It was a young woman with dark hair and striking eyes that seemed to follow me wherever I turned. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I dropped the photograph back into the box. A chill swept through the room, and I glanced at the door. The whispering returned, more insistent this time, echoing in the corners of my mind. I stood frozen, grappling with the realization that the warehouse held memories far older than I had imagined. Just then the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat before they returned. The shadows danced, and I could have sworn I saw a figure standing just outside the window, silhouetted against the faint glow of the streetlights. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer, heart pounding in my chest. The figure was indistinct, but the same dark-haired woman from the photograph emerged into clarity for a brief moment, her expression a mix of sadness and longing. I reached for the window, but before I could grasp the handle, the figure vanished into thin air. The darkness settled back into the room, leaving me shaken and breathless. My heart raced as I rushed back to the box, desperately flipping through the photographs. Each one told a story, a glimpse into the lives that had once filled this warehouse with laughter and purpose. Yet a sense of foreboding lingered, as if these images were warnings rather than memories. I realized I was not just observing history. I was part of a narrative that stretched beyond my comprehension. As I pored over the photos, I discovered one image that seemed different from the rest. It was a picture of the warehouse itself, but the surrounding area was transformed. The parking lot was bustling with cars, and people moved in and out, full of life. In the corner of the frame, a date was scrawled in faded ink, April 15th, 1985. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, plunging me into darkness. Panic gripped me as I scrambled for my phone, its screen illuminating the space. I glanced back at the box, and to my horror, I noticed the photographs had begun to shift, swirling like leaves caught in a gust of wind. The whispers grew louder, now echoing through the room with an urgency that felt suffocating. I backed away, unable to look away from the box, now a vortex of memories and shadows. The photograph of the woman stood out, her eyes locking onto mine, pleading for something I couldn't understand. With a sudden surge of courage, I reached back toward the box, desperate to find answers. In that moment, I felt a rush of energy sweep through me. The memories began to crystallize in my mind, visions of the past unfolding like a film. I saw the warehouse bustling with activity, the laughter of workers filling the air. But then shadows crept in, darkness seeping into the edges of joy, blurring the lines of reality. The scene shifted abruptly, showing a gathering storm, dark clouds swirling overhead as the workers rushed to finish their tasks. An unseen force loomed, an accident waiting to happen, and in that moment I understood. The woman in the photograph was not just a stranger. She had been a part of this place, a soul tied to its history. The lights flickered once more, and the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of voices rising and falling like waves crashing against the shore. I dropped the box, and it hit the ground with a dull thud, scattering the photographs across the floor. Each image seemed to pulse with life, each whisper a plea for remembrance. Overwhelmed, I stumbled back toward the office door, desperate to escape the surge of emotion. As I turned the handle, a final whisper enveloped me, wrapping around my mind like a warm embrace. It was a message of hope, a reminder that those who had come before me were still connected, still seeking acknowledgement in the shadows. I stepped out into the hallway, heart pounding, leaving the chaos of the box behind. As I moved further away from the source of the disturbance, the whispers faded into silence, replaced by the familiar sounds of the warehouse settling around me. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. From that night onward, the warehouse felt different. I continued my shifts, but I no longer viewed it as a mere job. I felt a connection to the past, an understanding that the stories of those who had come before were woven into the very fabric of the place. And though the box remained untouched, the photographs scattered across the floor, their presence lingered in my mind, a reminder that some memories refuse to fade, waiting patiently to be acknowledged even in the stillness of night. The night was uncharacteristically still, a heavy silence enveloping my small apartment as I settled in for another uneventful evening. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, the screen illuminating with an unknown number. Curiosity piqued. I reached for it, expecting the usual telemarketer or perhaps a wrong number. Instead, I hesitated, my heart skipping a beat as I recognized the area code. It belonged to the town where my childhood friend Alex had lived. Alex had passed away 6 months prior in a tragic car accident, a loss that had left a deep void in my life. We had shared countless memories, laughter echoing through the hallways of our high school, and a friendship that felt unbreakable. The call was unexpected, an intrusion into my grief. I answered, unsure of what to expect. At first, there was only silence on the other end, a heavy pause that seemed to stretch into eternity. I almost hung up, dismissing it as a glitch or a prank. But then a faint sound emerged, a whisper that sent chills racing down my spine. It was familiar yet distant, like a ghostly echo of the past. The voice called my name, soft and haunting, wrapping around me like a fog. Time seemed to stand still as I stood frozen, clutching the phone tightly. The whispering voice grew clearer, carrying the weight of memories long buried. Images of Alex flooded my mind, the two of us laughing, our shared secrets, and the dreams we had once dared to imagine. It felt as if a part of him had transcended the boundaries of life and death, reaching out to me through the ether. Then the voice shifted, a tinge of urgency threading through the whispers. I strained to listen, trying to catch every syllable. It spoke of unfinished business, of moments left unsaid and dreams left unfulfilled. My heart raced, caught in a whirlwind of emotions as I battled the disbelief clawing at my mind. Was this truly Alex, or merely my imagination running wild in the stillness of the night? As I stood there, the world around me faded into the background, the flickering light from the street lamp casting ghostly shadows on the walls. I felt a strange pull toward the call, a desire to connect with a piece of my past that I had lost forever. With every word, I could sense Alex's presence, a warmth that seemed to seep through the cold reality of grief. The urgency intensified, urging me to remember something important. Suddenly, the line crackled, the connection becoming unstable. I felt a surge of panic as the whispers began to distort, growing fainter. I tried to hold on, clinging to the last remnants of Alex's voice. Then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the call dropped, leaving me in a deafening silence. I stood there, breathless, grappling with the weight of what I had just experienced. The phone slipped from my hand, tumbling onto the table. My mind raced with questions. Was it really Alex? Or had my yearning for connection conjured an illusion? I could still hear the echoes of his voice, the urgency woven into each syllable. With a mix of determination and dread, I grabbed the phone and dialed the number back. It rang, but no one answered. I tried again, my heart pounding in my chest, but the call went straight to voicemail. Frustration bubbled within me as I stared at the screen, desperately searching for any sign of life. The number was unlisted, devoid of any information that might lead me to answers. As the night dragged on, sleep eluded me. I paced my apartment, replaying the call in my mind, trying to decipher its meaning. The whispers lingered in my ears, a haunting reminder of the connection we had shared. The urge to understand grew stronger, fueling my determination to uncover the truth. The following day, I drove to the cemetery where Alex was buried, a sense of unease settling in my gut. The sun shone brightly, a stark contrast to the heaviness weighing on my heart. I approached the gravestone, its cold surface a reminder of the finality of death. I knelt down, tracing my fingers over the engraved name, feeling a surge of longing to connect one last time. As I sat there, I closed my eyes, trying to summon the memories of our friendship, the laughter and dreams we had once shared. The wind rustled through the trees, whispering secrets I could barely grasp. It was as if the world around me was alive with possibility, urging me to listen more closely. Then, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I opened my eyes to see a piece of paper fluttering in the breeze, caught against the base of the gravestone. I reached down and picked it up, my breath catching in my throat. It was a note, hastily written and folded, bearing Alex's unmistakable handwriting. I unfolded it carefully, my hands trembling with anticipation. The words were brief but powerful, a message that echoed the urgency from the phone call. I need you to remember, it's not over yet. My heart raced as I read the note over and over, trying to process what it meant. Was this a message from beyond the grave, a final plea to uncover the truth behind his death? Or was it a manifestation of my grief, my mind grappling with the reality of loss? I felt a surge of determination rising within me. I had to honor his memory, to discover what he wanted me to know. I spent the following weeks retracing our steps, digging into the details of that fateful day. I spoke with mutual friends and family, piecing together fragments of information. The deeper I delved, the more questions arose, and with each revelation, a chilling sense of urgency unfurled within me. It was as if Alex was guiding me, leading me toward something significant. Finally, one night, as I sifted through old photographs and mementos, a familiar face in the background of one image caught my eye. A man I barely remembered, a fleeting connection from years ago. My heart raced as I recalled Alex mentioning this person in passing. With renewed focus, I set out to find him, convinced he held the key to understanding what had happened. When I finally located him, an older man living on the outskirts of town, I approached with caution. The conversation that ensued was unsettling, filled with revelations that sent chills down my spine. Alex had uncovered something, a secret that had put him in danger. The man spoke in hushed tones, sharing stories of a hidden world I had never known, one that threatened to swallow those who dared to reveal its truths. With each piece of information, the puzzle began to fit together. I realized the phone call had not been just a figment of my imagination. It was a bridge between worlds, a connection that transcended the boundaries of life and death. Alex had reached out to me, urging me to uncover the truth of his final days, to bring to light the darkness that had surrounded him. As I left the man's home, the weight of the past hung heavily on my shoulders, but a flicker of hope ignited within me. I would honor Alex's memory, not just by remembering him, but by ensuring that his story was told. The call from the grave had awakened something deep within me, a resolve to shine a light into the shadows, and unearth the secrets hidden beneath the surface. With every step, I could feel his presence beside me, guiding me toward closure and understanding. The night no longer felt silent. It resonated with the echoes of friendship, loss, and the unwavering bond that transcended even the finality of death. The old clock tower loomed over the town like a sentinel, its hands forever fixed in time, a relic of a bygone era. No one remembered when it had last worked, its face was faded, and the gears within had long since rusted. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about the clock, attributing its silence to an ancient curse. A remnant of the day tragedy struck the village. Few dared to venture close, as the air around it always carried an unsettling chill, even in the warmest months. As the night watchman, I had my routine, checking the streets and ensuring that all was secure. My rounds often led me past the clock tower, its dark silhouette casting long shadows that stretched across the cobblestones. I had grown accustomed to the strange atmosphere surrounding the structure, but there was something particularly foreboding about it on this night. The moon hung high in the sky, its light filtering through wisps of clouds, illuminating the tower in an otherworldly glow. As I approached, a shiver ran down my spine, an instinctive reaction to the sight before me. The clock's face, usually blank, seemed to shimmer slightly, the numbers flickering as though they were alive. I stopped, my heart quickening, unsure whether it was a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. I stepped closer, compelled to investigate. The air was still, the night quiet save for the distant rustling of leaves. I reached the base of the tower and peered up at the clock, its hands frozen at 3:15. An inexplicable urge pushed me to touch it, to connect with whatever force had brought the clock back to life, even if only for a moment. As I reached out, my fingertips brushed against the cool surface of the clock face. In an instant, the world shifted. The sound of gears grinding echoed within the tower, reverberating through the stones. I staggered back, heart racing, as the clock's hands began to move. They turned backward, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, until they seemed to spin wildly, defying the very laws of time. I was entranced, unable to look away as the air around me shimmered with an unseen energy. As the clock continued its chaotic dance, shadows began to form along the walls of the tower. They coalesced into indistinct shapes, twisting and writhing, as if drawn toward the light of the clock face. A sense of urgency pulsed through me, and I instinctively stepped back, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from the spectacle unfolding before me. The hands of the clock slowed, then finally stopped at a different time. 2:45. An eerie silence enveloped the area, broken only by the echo of my own breath. The shadows settled, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw a figure standing just beyond the tower's entrance, cloaked in darkness, watching me. It was hard to discern the details, but I could feel the weight of its gaze bearing down on me. I turned to flee, but something compelled me to look back just as the figure stepped into the moonlight. It was a woman, her features shrouded in a soft glow, yet her expression was one of sorrow. Her eyes were wide, filled with a longing that sent a chill down my spine. I felt a connection, a sense of understanding that transcended words. I wanted to reach out to her, to offer comfort, but the fear, rooting me in place, held me captive. Without warning, the clock chimed loudly, the sound echoing through the empty streets. Each chime resonated like a heartbeat, striking deep within me, drawing out emotions I couldn't quite place. The woman raised her hand as if to beckon me closer, but the shadows around her thickened, swirling like smoke, obscuring her figure. The moment hung heavy in the air, and I felt an overwhelming pull toward her, as if she was part of a dream I couldn't escape. Suddenly a deafening crack split the night, and the clock tower shook violently. I stumbled, barely able to keep my footing, and the shadows erupted into chaos, swirling and crashing against the stones. I turned and ran, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty streets. As I fled, the chimes continued to ring out, each one resonating through my bones, echoing in my mind long after I had escaped the tower's grasp. I dashed through the town, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and when I finally reached the safety of my post, I leaned against the wall, trying to calm my racing heart. I looked back toward the clock tower, but it stood silent and still, the shadows now mere figments of my imagination. I couldn't shake the memory of the woman's face, etched into my mind like a photograph, her sorrowful gaze lingering long after I had left. I returned to my patrol, but the night felt different, charged with an energy I couldn't comprehend. In the days that followed, the clock tower remained silent, as it always had. The townspeople went about their lives, unaware of the events that had unfolded that night. But for me, everything had changed. The clock's hands were once again frozen, yet I knew I had touched something beyond comprehension, something tethered to the very essence of time itself. From that night onward, I approached the tower with a mixture of trepidation and longing. I would often pause to glance at its face, waiting for a flicker of movement, hoping to glimpse the woman once more. But the clock remained still, locked in its eternal moment, a reminder of the past and the shadows that lingered just beyond our understanding. I continued my watch, but a piece of me remained bound to that clock. The knowledge that time once lost might still hold a deeper meaning, waiting in the shadows for someone brave enough to listen. Working the night shift at the old department store was never easy. The fluorescent lights flickered above, creating a staccato rhythm that echoed through the aisles. The store had been closed for hours, and the silence was an ever-present companion, punctuated only by the occasional hum of the security system. Each night, I patrolled the darkened spaces, ensuring that everything was in order. But despite the familiarity of the routine, an unsettling feeling always clung to me. One evening, as I was making my rounds, I passed the cosmetics section. A large mirror hung on the wall, its surface reflecting the dim light in a way that seemed almost inviting. I had always noticed how the mirror caught shadows in peculiar ways, sometimes making it seem as though figures moved just out of sight. I shook my head, dismissing it as fatigue playing tricks on my mind. But on this particular night, as I approached, I couldn't shake the sense of being drawn to the mirror. I stood in front of it, staring at my own reflection, feeling the shadows in the store deepen behind me. As I examined my reflection, a strange sensation began to wash over me. The image of myself seemed to flicker, as if momentarily losing its clarity. I blinked, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw something behind me, a figure standing just at the edge of the mirror's frame. Turning quickly, I scanned the area around me, but there was nothing there. The aisles were empty, and the only sound was the distant ticking of the wall clock. I returned my gaze to the mirror, but the reflection was normal once again. I shook my head, dismissing it as an illusion caused by the dim lighting. Continuing my patrol, I tried to shake off the odd feeling, but it lingered like a shadow at the back of my mind. The store was eerily quiet, every creak of the floorboards and rustle of plastic wrapping amplifying my anxiety. After a few more laps around the store, I found myself back in the cosmetics section, the mirror drawing me in once more. This time I stood closer, inspecting the surface for any imperfections. As I leaned in, a sudden chill swept over me and my breath caught in my throat. In the depths of the mirror, I thought I could see movement, a swirl of shadows that didn't match my reflection. I blinked again, and there it was, a fleeting image of a figure behind me. It was not quite clear, but it was unmistakably human. I stepped back, heart racing, and again glanced over my shoulder. The aisle was empty, yet the mirror continued to hold something just out of reach. My pulse quickened as I leaned forward once more, staring into the depths of the glass. The figure seemed to emerge more clearly this time, a woman with long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Her expression was one of longing, her eyes locked onto mine as if she were trying to reach out through the glass. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, eyes wide. I felt the chill creeping up my spine, and I was torn between the instinct to flee and the urge to understand what was happening. The woman in the mirror did not move, but her gaze held a deep intensity that pulled me in. I could see her lips move, though no sound reached my ears. My heart pounded as I tried to comprehend the impossible. I reached out, hesitating just before my fingers touched the cool surface of the mirror. In that moment, the world around me seemed to fade, the dim lights of the store dimming further, leaving only the two of us, myself and the reflection that wasn't quite a reflection. I pulled my hand away, a surge of fear coursing through me as the room around me distorted, the edges of reality blurring like a dream. I stumbled backward and the woman's image flickered, her face shifting between desperation and sadness. With every heartbeat, the feeling of being trapped in that moment grew more intense. The mirror began to ripple like water, and I realized I was not merely seeing her. It felt as though she was trying to communicate, to break through whatever barrier held her captive. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to turn away, but the weight of her gaze held me in place. When I opened my eyes again, the mirror was once again clear, my own reflection staring back at me. But the chill remained, wrapping around me like a shroud. I turned on my heel and fled from the cosmetics section, my footsteps echoing through the aisles. I didn't stop running until I reached the main entrance, the glass doors seeming like a portal to the outside world. I stood there, breathing heavily, and glanced back toward the cosmetics section. In the dim light, the mirror was just a mirror again, reflecting only the empty aisles. But I could still feel her presence, a lingering sense of sorrow etched into the very fabric of the store. I hurried to the exit, unable to shake the sensation of her eyes watching me, even from behind the glass. As I left the store that night, the feeling of dread hung heavy in the air. I couldn't explain what I had seen or why it had affected me so deeply, but I knew I wouldn't return to that mirror again. The reflection that wasn't merely a trick of the light had shifted something within me, leaving behind an unsettling realization that some places hold memories and echoes far beyond our understanding, waiting for someone to notice them and perhaps to set them free. As a night watchman at an old manufacturing plant, I was well acquainted with the eerie quiet of the building after hours. The clanging of machinery and chatter of workers faded into silence, leaving behind an unsettling stillness. My shift began at midnight, a time when shadows stretched long across the factory floor and the flickering lights overhead cast a ghostly glow. Most nights my routine was predictable. I would make my rounds, checking the doors and windows to ensure everything was secure. The factory had its share of odd noises, creaks and groans that echoed through the vast space. But I had grown accustomed to them, attributing them to the settling of the old structure. One night, as I walked through the assembly line area, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The chill in the air seemed to cling to me, a reminder that I was alone in a place once filled with life and energy. I pressed on, trying to focus on my tasks. As I reached the far end of the factory, I noticed a faint light flickering from the corner of my eye. It was coming from the maintenance room, a place I had no reason to enter since it was typically locked after hours. Curiosity tugged at me. I approached the door, half expecting to find it ajar, but it remained shut. The flickering light continued to glow beneath the crack, illuminating the hallway in a strange rhythm. I hesitated, feeling the weight of the silence press against me. After a moment I decided to knock softly, but the sound echoed louder than I anticipated. The light dimmed abruptly, and I was left staring at the door, unsure whether to turn back or press forward. I stood there, straining to hear anything that might indicate someone was inside, but the silence returned, thickening the atmosphere around me. I took a step back, ready to leave when I heard a faint sound, a rustling, followed by what sounded like footsteps. My heart raced as I glanced down the hallway, but there was nothing there. I turned my attention back to the door, and for a fleeting moment, I could have sworn I saw a shadow pass behind the frosted glass. Compelled by a mix of fear and intrigue, I reached for the doorknob. To my surprise, it turned easily in my hand. I pushed the door open and stepped into the maintenance room, my breath hitching in my throat. The flickering light came from a single bulb hanging above, casting eerie shadows across the room. The space was cluttered with old tools and equipment, but it was empty, devoid of any human presence. I took a cautious step inside, scanning the room for any signs of life. The air felt heavy with dust, and a sense of foreboding crept over me. I moved deeper into the room, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. I inspected the tools, their rusted surfaces reflecting the dim light. As I turned to leave, I heard it again, a faint rustling sound coming from the back of the room. My pulse quickened as I turned slowly, peering into the shadows that cloaked the corners. I squinted, searching for the source of the noise. The sensation of being observed enveloped me, making my skin crawl. Just as I was about to retreat, I caught sight of something out of the corner of my eye, a shape that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. It was a figure, translucent and ethereal, hovering near the wall. My heart raced as I took a step back, and the figure shifted, almost as if it was reacting to my fear. The room grew colder, and the flickering light overhead intensified, illuminating the specter for a brief moment before plunging the space back into shadow. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over an old toolbox. The figure seemed to draw closer, its features becoming slightly clearer. I could make out a face, a hollow gaze staring directly at me, filled with sorrow and longing. Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee, racing out of the room and slamming the door behind me. I leaned against the door, breathing heavily, my mind racing. The shadows loomed larger in the dim light of the hallway, and I felt as if they were closing in around me. I could still feel the weight of the figure's gaze, lingering in the back of my mind. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing. As I returned to my rounds, the factory seemed even more desolate than before. Each step echoed, reverberating through the empty spaces. I passed the main production area, where rows of machines stood silent, their metal bodies casting twisted shadows on the floor. Every creak of the building sent jolts of fear coursing through me, and the events in the maintenance room haunted my thoughts. Just before my shift was set to end, I took one final walk through the factory, hoping to shake off the dread that had settled in my chest. I passed the maintenance room, where the light flickered once more, beckoning me back. Despite every instinct telling me to stay away, I felt an inexplicable pull toward the door. I stood outside, heart racing, my hand hovering over the knob. Taking a deep breath, I turned it and pushed the door open. The light was steady now, illuminating the room in a soft glow. The clutter remained unchanged, but the figure was gone. I stepped inside, cautiously, my senses on high alert. I scanned the space for any trace of what I had seen earlier. As I turned to leave, something caught my attention. A small, dusty photograph lay on the floor, half hidden beneath a workbench. I picked it up, wiping away the dust to reveal the image. A black and white photo of a group of factory workers from decades past. Among them was the figure I had seen, a young man with a distant look in his eyes. A wave of sadness washed over me as I realized he had been trapped in this space, lingering between worlds, waiting for something he may never find. I placed the photograph back on the workbench, feeling a sense of solemnity envelop me. As I left the room one last time, the shadows seemed to soften around me, and the oppressive weight began to lift. I locked the door behind me, knowing that some mysteries were best left undisturbed. The rest of my shift passed quietly, the factory feeling less haunted, as if a lingering presence had finally found peace. As dawn broke, casting light into the shadows, I took one last look at the building. The lonely watchman had not just guarded the night, he had become a part of its forgotten history, a reminder that sometimes the past seeks to make itself known, even in the most unexpected of places. I worked as a night dispatcher for a small taxi company, a job that had its share of quiet hours and frantic moments. The late-night shifts were usually uneventful, filled with the hum of the radio and the occasional call for a ride. It was a lonely job, but I had grown accustomed to the stillness of the night, the only company being the flickering fluorescent lights overhead and the glow of my computer screen. One particular night, as I was sifting through the usual requests, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the line was shaky and strained, barely above a whisper. The caller requested a pickup from an old abandoned part of town, a place known for its dark history and empty streets. An uneasy sensation prickled at the back of my mind, but I noted the details and dispatched a driver to the location. I kept an ear tuned to the radio, the static and chatter filling the silence as I awaited an update. Minutes passed and I became restless, glancing at the clock as the seconds ticked by. The driver, a seasoned veteran named Dave, had been with the company for years and was familiar with the area. When I checked in, he sounded distracted. His voice was tense and I could hear the crackling of his radio in the background. He mentioned something about the place being creepy, but reassured me he'd be there shortly. As I waited, the lights above flickered, casting strange shadows across the office. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to the aging infrastructure of the building. My attention returned to the radio, where I could hear snippets of conversation. Another driver spoke about an old urban legend involving the abandoned area, a story about a phantom hitchhiker who would vanish upon reaching their destination. The unease I had felt earlier returned with renewed intensity. I tried to focus on my duties, but the restless energy in the room gnawed at me. When I checked the time again, it had been nearly 30 minutes since I dispatched Dave. I decided to call him, but all I received was static. A knot formed in my stomach as I tried to shake off the sense of dread creeping in. Just then, the phone rang again, startling me. It was the same number as before. My pulse quickened as I answered, and the shaky voice returned. The caller said they were still waiting, growing increasingly agitated. They mentioned they had seen something moving in the shadows, something that made them feel uneasy. The words sent a chill down my spine, but I assured them that help was on the way. As I hung up, I felt an overwhelming urge to check on Dave. I tried his number once more, and again I was met with static. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed the company's radio frequency, hoping to get through to him directly. I switched channels, scanning for any sign of him. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the static. It was distorted, barely recognizable. I could only make out fragments of sentences, warnings mixed with incoherent ramblings. Then I heard it, Dave's voice, frantic and disoriented, speaking about something in the dark, something chasing him. The line cut out abruptly, plunging me into a heavy silence. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my jacket and bolted out of the office, my heart racing. I rushed to the parking lot, scanning for Dave's car. The night was eerily quiet, the shadows stretching across the pavement like grasping fingers. I found his taxi abandoned near the entrance, its engine still warm. I could see the doors ajar, the interior lights flickering. Anxiety gnawed at me as I called out his name, but only the echo of my voice answered back. I walked toward the car, peering inside, but it was empty. No sign of Dave anywhere. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I stepped away from the vehicle. I glanced toward the old part of town where he had gone to pick up the caller. I could see a faint light flickering in the distance, as if beckoning me. Ignoring the voice in my head, urging me to stay put, I took a deep breath and started toward the light. With each step, the darkness closed in around me, the weight of the night pressing down on my shoulders. I followed the glow, my heart pounding as I approached the source. It led me to an alleyway, a narrow passage shrouded in shadow. The flickering light was coming from a broken street lamp, casting erratic shadows that danced against the walls. I peered into the alley, feeling a chill wash over me. The shadows shifted and swirled, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure standing at the far end. It was obscured, but I could feel its presence. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I stepped forward, drawn by an invisible force. As I neared the end of the alley, the light suddenly extinguished, plunging me into darkness. I froze, panic surging through me as I fumbled for my phone to illuminate the way. The dim glow revealed nothing but brick walls and scattered debris. In that moment of confusion, I heard a soft sound like footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, my breath hitching in my throat. The shadow shifted again, and I caught a glimpse of something moving, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Fighting back fear, I backed away toward the street, my pulse racing. I glanced over my shoulder one last time and noticed a shadow lingering just beyond the edge of the alley. It was an indistinct figure, watching, waiting. The sensation of being pursued gripped me, and I sprinted back to the parking lot, my heart pounding in my ears. Once safely inside my car, I locked the doors and fumbled with the keys. I glanced back at the alley, half expecting to see Dave emerge, but the darkness swallowed everything. I turned the ignition and drove away, leaving the haunting shadows behind. Days later, I learned that Dave never returned. He was declared missing, and the search for him turned up nothing. The company eventually shut down, and I left the town soon after, but the memory of that night haunted me. The whispers of the caller echoed in my mind, and the fear of the unknown lingered long after I had fled. I never answered another call that came from that area, forever haunted by the last call that led to a darkness I couldn't escape. I used to work at an old factory that operated 24/7, known for its long history and eerie reputation. My night shift was mostly quiet, filled with the low hum of machinery and the occasional clatter of tools. I had grown accustomed to the factory's layout, the creaking floors, and the shadows that danced in the corners. Yet, there was one door that always piqued my curiosity. The door marked "Restricted Area." It was a heavy steel door, rusted at the edges, and it seemed to emit a chill whenever I passed it. The sign warned against entering, but the allure of what lay beyond was too tempting to resist. I had heard stories from other workers about strange happenings in that part of the factory. Disembodied voices, glimpses of figures, and strange noises echoing through the hallways. Most dismissed these tales as mere ghost stories, but they lingered in my mind like whispers. One night, while I was making my rounds, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. My heart raced at the sight. This was an opportunity I couldn't ignore. I glanced around, ensuring no one was watching, and pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The room was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from a flickering bulb overhead. As I stepped inside, I was struck by the sudden drop in temperature. The air felt dense, almost as if it was resisting my entry. I hesitated for a moment, a sense of unease creeping over me, but I pressed on. The walls were lined with old machinery, covered in dust, and the faint smell of oil hung heavy in the air. It was as if time had stopped in this forgotten space. I moved deeper into the room, drawn by an inexplicable force. The machinery was strangely arranged, as if someone had deliberately placed it there, yet there were no signs of recent activity. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up, an instinct urging me to turn back, but curiosity compelled me to explore further. In the corner of the room stood an old workbench cluttered with tools and rusty implements. I noticed a journal resting atop the bench, its pages yellowed with age. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, flipping through the pages filled with frantic scrawls and sketches. The entries described strange occurrences and events that had transpired in this very room. Disappearances, unexplained noises, and shadows that seemed to move on their own. The last entry was hastily written, almost frantic in its urgency. It warned of a presence that lurked within, something that watched from the dark corners, waiting for someone to let it out. As I read those words, a chill ran down my spine. The atmosphere shifted, the shadows deepening as if they were closing in around me. I looked up, scanning the room for any sign of movement. A sudden clang echoed through the space, the sound reverberating off the walls. My heart raced and I dropped the journal, its pages fluttering as it hit the ground. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the room. Panic surged within me as I pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers began to swirl around me, faint but insistent, echoing the warnings I had read. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, darting just beyond the reach of the light. I pounded on the door, desperation clawing at my throat as the whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. I could feel the weight of the presence around me, as if it were observing my every move. The machinery creaked ominously, and I realized with horror that I was not alone. I took a step back, my pulse racing, as the whispers coalesced into a single chilling voice that seemed to reverberate through my bones. In a surge of adrenaline, I backed away from the door, searching for another way out. My eyes darted around the room, and that's when I saw it, a dark shape emerging from the shadows, looming closer with each heartbeat. It was as if the very darkness itself was alive, reaching for me with unseen hands. With a final desperate push, I lunged at the door. This time, the handle turned, and the door swung open as if it had been waiting for me to leave. I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath, and slammed the door shut behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the main floor, the whispers fading behind me. I never returned to that room. The door remained locked in my mind, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked within the factory's depths. The stories I once dismissed now echoed in my thoughts, warning of what lay hidden just beyond the threshold, a secret best left undisturbed. I worked at a hotel that had seen better days, a once grand establishment now faded and worn. The creaking floors and flickering lights added to the atmosphere, giving the place an eerie charm that was both unsettling and captivating. The night shift was usually quiet, with only a few guests coming and going, and I took comfort in the routine of checking in visitors and ensuring the property was secure. One particularly quiet night, while making my rounds on the upper floors, I noticed a light coming from one of the guest room windows. The glow flickered like a candle, and I walked closer, curious to see who might be awake at this hour. As I approached, I saw a man standing by the window, gazing out into the dark night. He was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, the kind that seemed out of place in the modern world. His hair was neatly combed back, and his posture was stiff, as if he had just stepped out of a different era. I hesitated, unsure whether to knock or move on, but something about the way he stood drew me in. I glanced around the hallway, confirming that it was empty. I turned my attention back to the man, who remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the parking lot below. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I hadn't seen him come in, and the room was marked as unoccupied on my list. I knocked softly on the door, but he didn't turn around. Instead, he seemed to become more absorbed in his watch. An uneasy sensation crept over me, urging me to retreat, but curiosity pushed me to press on. I opened the door slowly, stepping inside the room. The light flickered off as I crossed the threshold, leaving the space dim and shadowy. The man still stood at the window, his back to me. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was musty, the curtains drawn tight, and a chill hung in the air. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words lodged in my throat. It was as if the room had swallowed all sound. I turned to grab my flashlight from my belt, and when I looked back at the window, the man was gone. I stumbled back, scanning the room frantically, but it was empty. The faint sound of my breathing echoed in the silence. My heart raced as I felt a strange heaviness settle over me. I walked to the window and peered out, expecting to see him outside, but the parking lot lay still and quiet, illuminated only by the moonlight. Confusion washed over me as I processed what had just happened. I glanced around the room again, looking for any sign of the man, but all I found was the worn furniture and an untouched bed. I felt a surge of dread and quickly made my way to the door, ready to leave this strange encounter behind. As I turned to exit, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror on the wall. My reflection stared back, wide-eyed and trembling. I blinked, and for a split second I thought I saw the man standing behind me, his expression inscrutable, his presence almost tangible. I whipped around, but once again there was nothing but the empty room. Panic clawed at me, and I dashed out, slamming the door behind me. Once in the hallway, I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced back at the door, half expecting it to open, but it remained shut. I made my way to the front desk, my heart still racing. The rest of the night passed in a blur, every creak of the building sending jolts of fear through me. I couldn't stop replaying the encounter in my mind, the man's unnerving presence lingering like a shadow. When my shift ended, I hastily clocked out and left the hotel, glancing over my shoulder one last time before stepping into the cool night air. To this day, I avoid that hotel, convinced that the man in the window is still watching, waiting for someone else to notice him. The haunting image of his silhouette remains etched in my memory, a chilling reminder of a night that blurred the lines between reality and the unknown. I worked the graveyard shift at a 24-hour convenience store in a small town. Most nights were quiet, with only a handful of customers coming and going, but I had grown accustomed to the eerie solitude. My routine consisted of stocking shelves and cleaning the register, but one particular night would change everything. Around 2 a.m., while I was restocking chips, a soft, indistinct sound began to drift through the store. At first, I dismissed it as the hum of the refrigerators, but as I focused, I realized it was something else. Whispers. They were faint, but persistent, seemingly coming from the back room where the storage shelves were stacked high. Curiosity pulled me toward the sound, even though an instinct told me to stay away. I set down the bag of chips and cautiously approached the door to the back room. The whispers grew louder, and I could almost make out words, though they remained frustratingly elusive. I opened the door and stepped inside, the darkness swallowing me as the fluorescent lights flickered overhead. I scanned the room, but it was empty. No one was there. The whispers quieted as I ventured further into the space, but the feeling of being watched enveloped me. I could hear my own breathing, quickening as I took a few more steps into the shadows. Suddenly, the whispers swelled again, echoing off the walls like a twisted chorus. My skin prickled as I turned on my heel and hurried back to the register. I leaned against the counter, trying to calm my racing heart, but the unsettling whispers continued to creep through the store, a constant reminder of whatever was lurking just out of sight. I glanced toward the security monitors, hoping for a distraction, but the screen showed only empty aisles, casting an eerie glow across the room. Each time I turned my attention back to the whispers, they seemed to shift locations, as if the source was moving just out of reach. It was a game I didn't want to play. A chill raced down my spine as I glanced at the front door, where a shadow flickered in the corner of my eye. I looked again, but there was nothing there. Just the quiet street, illuminated by the glow of the gas station's neon sign. I forced myself to focus on the mundane tasks at hand, checking inventory and wiping down the counters, but the whispers persisted, wrapping around my thoughts like a vine. Minutes turned into hours, and the more I tried to ignore the unsettling sounds, the more they seemed to amplify. I picked up my phone and scrolled through social media, but the whispers kept tugging at my mind, pulling me back to the back room, where shadows seemed to gather just out of sight. After what felt like an eternity, the store's door chimes jingled, and I looked up, half expecting a customer. Instead, I found myself staring at a figure standing just inside the entrance, a silhouette shrouded in darkness. It was as if someone had stepped in from another realm, and the whispers crescendoed in a haunting symphony, filling the store with an unbearable tension. I blinked, and in that fleeting moment, the figure vanished, leaving only the shadows and the whispers behind. Panic surged through me as I turned and fled from the register, racing toward the exit. I burst through the door, the cool night air hitting me like a wave, and I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I glanced back at the store where the lights flickered, and the whispers echoed faintly in the distance. I didn't return to that shift again. The memory of that night lingered like an unwelcome guest, a chilling reminder of the mysteries hidden in the darkness